The Big Three. Section 1. The Universal Truth, Pyromancing. Comedy, like beauty, is all around us, waiting to be noticed. God comes in many forms, none of which are more obvious and avoided than ourselves. Chapter 1. In the days preceding the 21st century, there came up a great debate to decide which form of long-distance correspondence better communicated the self. Although such a debate rarely made news for the glorifying media, it is heard on more than one occasion by those who patronize coffee shops. The argument starts by any two persons who have engulfed more than 5 cups of coffee over a 3-hour period of time. Having pushed the body to its maximum caffeine intake, this conversation is sought as a safe haven for those patrons who want to avoid idle chatter. Ironic? There were those who preached that the phone was the best form because it was portable. The phone would allow an instant conversation with whomever you wished, whenever you wished. Provided one was there to answer it, someone would say. Yeah, that's right. Letters are the best way because it's cheaper and it allows you to communicate a lot in one message. But the flow of a conversation reveals the self more than what is actually said. There is email, which, when done correctly, is the combination of the two. Greater technology doesn't always mean better communication. Are you saying the essence of a person is conveyed better by an inanimate paper and pen than a form of technology vibrating with electrical energies? To some extent. I mean, doesn't it make sense that a paper that has no charge would be more likely to absorb more of the sender's charge? What if you took that paper and scanned it into a computer to email it? No, it defeats the whole purpose because once you scan it, it's not on the paper. It's still the same words. Besides, doesn't interaction with computers convey ourselves to the computer? Yeah. Scanning something is patience building, and doing it by hand is a lot like, I think everyone here knows what it's like to do it by hand. Everyone at the table turns around or looks up to see Michael lumber in, wearing his hangover sunglasses. Someone remarks that Jimmy Homepage had just entered the building. No one laughs. Mike sits himself down in the one empty chair at the table. Felix peers at him without the aid of his glasses, despite the fact that they are on his face. You look like shit, Felix says, reaching for his box of Reds. I feel like shit too, Mike answers, pulling out a Camel from his pack. He leans into the flame that Felix holds in front of him. Thanks. He takes a puff. You're not going to believe what happened last night. Get this. I was in the city meeting up with, Hey, MC, when did you get back into town? Jeremy, who prefers to be called Jerry, walks over from the payphone. Long time no see. How is Thailand? You're in my seat. Mike smiles at the punk boy. Thailand was great, and as they say over there, he leans down to see over his glasses. Too bad. He turns around and inhales his Camel. Jeremy walks around behind him and backhands him in the head. This causes his glasses to slide down his nose and smoke to come out of his nostrils. Dark, light, and brown hair all laugh at this slightly. Punk Boy grabs a chair from another table and squeezes in next to Mike. So, when did you get back into town? Jeremy repeats. Michael takes a drag of his camel, and Jeremy takes out a cool. Oh, last night, Mike says, exhaling. Late, like around. That's cool. Do you have a light? Jeremy says to Mike. Actually, I don't. I lost my lighter in Thailand. Oh, hey George, do you have a light? Light Hair picks up the green plastic lighter in the middle of the table and hands it to Brown Hair, who hands it to Dark Hair, who hands it to Felix, who hands it to Mike, who hands it to Jeremy. The cool is lit, and the lighter is back in the middle of the table. How was Thailand? You gotta tell me all about it, 'cause I'm not going to get there in this lifetime. Michael turns to Jeremy and contemplates how true that last statement is. If Jeremy is going to have any contact with what's on the other side of the earth, it is going to have to come from Michael's memory. Because Jeremy is the type of person whose credo in life is live in the now. He relies so much on the present to give him the excitement he needs to find his life enjoyable that he never seems to look beyond. Maybe a few days ahead, sometimes he'll make plans for a road trip months in advance. His road trips are always by car and usually not more than 100 miles. Jeremy is someone who baits himself with a reward at a later point in time if he can live day by day to get there. He'd have to plan the trip decades in advance if he's ever going to reach Thailand. I went over there because Joachim asked me to put all his company's research for a project onto a mainframe that could be accessed by offices around the globe. By modem? Yeah, I designed a system that could be reached by phone but had security codes at every level. Pretty basic stuff. Hey, Brown Hair says, I saw your friend in here about a month ago. He was here with that fine artist chick from Cali. She's from Arizona, not California, Mike says. Whatever. It's all the same from here, Brown Hair replies. Mike puffs his camel. That doesn't bother me. She can hang out with whoever she wants. Mike shakes his head and takes another drag of his cigarette. Felix glances at him. Why's that? Did you hook up with Kat again? His cigarette must taste like lemon juice, what with the face he made at the sound of Kat's name. No, Katrina is a child. He leans his forearms on the table. I'm a man. Everyone looks at Michael, waiting for a punchline. He delivers none and stares them back. In the world of coffee shop etiquette, this is completely normal. In the modern business world, silence may be wretchedly uncomfortable. It's been heard remarked within these walls that silence in business precedes failure in business, that if you ain't making 'em speak, then you'll be gone within a week. Those words are from Andre himself, before he came to terms with the idea of comfortable silence. Andre had tried to have entertainment in his place. He had musicians and poets on occasions. For a while, he even tried allowing stand-up comedy. His attempts at theme single nights are too numerous to mention, but so comical that it is hard to resist the temptation. Banana Tango Night takes first prize for the strangest. People coming in wearing their favorite fruits, hoping someone would start the eating mating process. The most ill-fated night was the negligee underwear party, taking an idea from Howard Stern. The night of the party, when everything was set and ready to go, the rain started, but the singles of Forest Hills, Queens, would not let a torrential downpour stop the instinctual drive to continue the species. They arrived in their undergarments that were quite wet. As more people showed up, Andre's smile grew bigger and bigger until around 1 in the morning when the first negligee was thrown to the floor. Underwear, nighties, bras, and t-shirts soon began flying all over the room. The tables were thrown on their sides to clear the floor for the dancing. Soon, it turned into an orgy that almost burnt Andre's to the ground. Andre went out and bought a karaoke machine after that. Tuesdays and Fridays, he'd fire the box up, and people would stand up and belt out their own renditions of Hotel California and Smooth Operator until the machine could take no more and caused an electrical fire that again almost burned the cafe away. On both instances, the building was saved by the water gun of his daughter, who, since then, carried a fire extinguisher wherever she'd go. Andre put up a big banner in the window that read, "Smokers Welcome," when New York City passed the indoor smokers prohibition law. He also took his Sony television from the back and perched it on the wall out front. After that, he became accustomed to silence from his patrons. The men around the table know silence is the only answer to Michael's grandstanding. They sigh and look around the room and smoke their cigarettes, waiting for the pride in Michael to settle. It is that understanding in an interaction that causes the participants to become self-realized. You see, Michael waits for someone to continue the conversation other than himself, but no one wants him to go on if he is going to be self-indulgent enough to point out an obvious fact, like he's a man. "Fuck y'all then," Mike says to the table. Again, everyone looked in his direction. He smokes his cigarette. "Come on, man," Jerry says. "Don't get down. Tell me what happened in Thailand." Around the table, there are nods of recognition. Mike puts down his cigarette. "Fine, fine. It's funny that you brought those two up." "Joachim and Farah?" "Yeah." Mike looks over to brown hair. "That fine artist chick." Brown hair shrugs. "She's a fine chick who's an artist. Do I lie?" Mike laughs and shakes his head. "Before I left 2 months ago, I was going over last-minute details at my apartment with Joachim when Farah calls up. It's a Friday night, and she wants to go to the tunnel. So we give her a half hour to get ready, then we drive all the way downtown and pick up her and her friend Lisa. The girl who's born on your birthday. Her." Mike takes a puff. "Anyway, we get to the club and dance for a while, but I smoke, so after a few turns around the floor, I'm sitting and Joachim's dancing with both of them. So I'm just sitting there trying to catch my breath when Poppy, the largest Jamaican man in the world, comes up and sells me $30 of the funkiest, greenest skunk on the island." Felix shakes his head and puffs his cigarette. Mike goes on. "So I ask him where I can score some X, because I want to dance the night away and sleep on the plane the next day. He tells me that the only man he ever deals with for E is Noah in the Club Arc across and uptown. So I get Lisa and Farah and Joachim, and ask them if they want to go to the Ark and do ecstasy tonight. They say sure, and we figure we could go to Limelight later to dance. So we take off and get to Noah's, and he doesn't have E. All he has is Coke. You didn't, Jerry asks. Michael nods and smiles. Felix shakes his head. Dark hair shakes Mike's hand. Welcome to the club. So what happened? Jerry asks as he ashes his cool. So I bought a gram and Joachim bought a gram, which is weird because he usually doesn't join me in my drug escapades. I guess this was something new for him. Michael puffs. Anyway, we do a couple of lines in the Ark just to get the feel of it. What'd you think? Light hair lights up a parliament and leans back. It wasn't what I was hoping for. I would have liked Xing a lot better, but it was okay for the time. We danced in the Ark for 2 hours. Around 3 a.m, we head out for the Limelight and get in right away. We danced for half an hour and do lines. Sometime in the night, Joachim just stayed on the dance floor as we were finishing up the bag. We cut the last 3 lines while sitting at a table against the wall, and out of nowhere, Farah starts making out with me. So I start grabbing her tits and sucking on her neck, and she grabs Lisa and kisses her over my shoulder. Then both of them are leaning up against me while they're making out. And they got their hands on my dick, and I'm going nuts because Joachim drove and I can't move this party anywhere. I'm sure she knew that. Mike looks over to Jeremy and takes a drag. After we dropped off Lisa at 7 a.m, Farah told me she thought Lisa and I would make a great couple, but we're too much alike and neither of us would start anything with the other. So Farah had to jumpstart it for us. He puffs. The only thing is, I think Lisa liked Farah more than she liked me. He smiles in silence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mike shifts himself in his chair and leans back. So, we're in the club at the table, petting and getting it going when this bouncer comes up and starts yelling at us about the lines being on the table. Trying to convey a message of goodwill, I offer the guy a line. Well, he flips out and grabs me by the collar and pulls me up and starts yelling in my face to get out of the club. So I grab him back and we spin across the floor. He's still yelling and I'm getting dizzy, so I tripped over someone's foot and fall down. He leans down to pick me up again and Joachim grabs him from behind and pulls him off me. The guy stumbles back and pulls a gun on Joachim. Everybody stopped moving, even the other bouncers that had come running forward. Everyone was stone still, waiting to see what the guy was going to do. Mike puffs. Joachim has his hands at his sides and calmly says, "Drop the gun and I'll do as you please. Keep it pointed at me and one of us will die with ease." Balls, man. Your friend must have balls bigger than bread boxes. Everyone looks at Dark Hair. He shrugs. Alliteration. They turn back to Mike. So the guy puts the gun away, and Joachim extends a hand to help him up. The guy smacks his hand away, and Joachim laughs. Farah and Lisa walk over and help me up, and we all leave. Joachim's talking and cursing about the state of a nation whose people are so high-strung that a gun comes into play before a good bar brawl even starts. I'm walking with one girl under each arm. We drive out to Long Island and go to a diner at 6 in the morning. Afterwards, we go to a beach near Lisa's house and roll up a few joints. We kicked back and got high to the sky until 7. Then we dropped off Lisa and drove back to the city. Mike ashes his cigarette. In the car, on the way back, Farah asks why Joachim didn't smoke. But she was stoned, so she's rambling on about how she doesn't mean to be rude, and if he feels it's none of her business, he should just say so. It just seems so strange to her that he'd do coke but not smoke. This girl sounds like a space cadet, Dark Hair says, trying to redeem himself. She can be at times, Mike answers, but Joachim knows how to handle it. He looks in the rearview mirror, 'cause she's in the back seat, and says, I just feel like I've done everything one can do while high. This quiets her down, but she looks confused. So I whip out another fat joint and light it up. I go to hand it to Joachim, who looks at me and smiles. He goes, let me tell you a story. I remember a time when men who smoked hemp and used the effect in thought were respected by people. Farah interrupts him and says that stoners have never been respected. Joachim looks in the rear view again and says, when Thomas Jefferson and George Washington told people to revolt against the mother country and to start a new nation that would be a combination of cultures in a free society, those people listened. So I ask him, what about the story he was going to tell me? And he says, one time, George and Tom were discussing the effects of light positioning on their hemp plants, pontificating that a parallel could be drawn between how light affects plants and humans if one spent the time to find that connection. Me and Farah are staring at him, waiting for him to finish. He suddenly realizes this and tells us, that's what I imagined the last time I smoked. And then he smiles. Well, Farah thought she got the joke and starts laughing. I'm not one to kill the mood, so I start laughing too. But I didn't get no joke. Mike takes a last puff and puts his cigarette out. What does this have to do with Thailand? Jerry asks. Felix starts laughing. I'll tell you. What'll it be, guys? Mike was cut off by Pierre, the waiter who sells drywall to construction companies out west in his spare time. Mike looks over his shoulder to see Pierre standing next to him, taking orders for coffees from around the table. He gets back to Mike, who orders a BLT lunch combo, salad, beverage, and dessert. When he looks back to the table, Dark Hair lights up an American spirit and starts blowing smoke rings. Jerry turns towards the door as the blonde twins walk in, escorted by Sharon. Michael sits wondering when the American customary greeting got so loud. As Mike massages his temples, Sharon sits in Jerry's chair. Headache? He asks, trying to be cheery. A headache hanging around from last night, Mike says. Sharon smiles as if he got the joke. What do you mean? Lighthair asks. Mike looks across the table to answer, but Jerry turns his as well as the twins' attention at Mike. Wait, just tell me how Thailand was, Jerry pleads. It was hot and humid and a lot of work. Mike is looking back and forth between the twins. I only got to go to the beaches once. I didn't know there are public beaches in Thailand, one twin asks, the other having the same inquisitive expression. "They're to the south, but I was in Bangkok most of the time." The twins nod in understanding. Jerry nods too, then looks down to Sharon. "When does the movie start?" 8:17. "Well, we should get going," Jerry says, looking up at the clock. He addresses the group. "We're going to the Midway. We'll be back in 2 hours." Michael taps each finger twice when he hears the number 2. Brown Hair would usually inquire as to what film they were going to see, but Pierre walks up with 5 coffees and a Coke. "Oh, shoot. Pierre, man, cancel one of those coffees," Jerry says. Pierre lifts his left eyebrow in a move that has helped him break the 15% tip barrier. Mike looks up at Jerry with his right eyebrow lifted in the same fashion. Michael holds the tension on Jerry's face by delaying the scene. Sharon turns and picks up Jeremy's cools, taking one for himself. Jerry takes the pack and extracts a cigarette. Realizing that Jerry is killing himself over this, Mike looks up to Pierre. "I'll take it." Pierre nods and gives Jerry a look. He places the last cup on the tray in front of Michael. He walks over and greets the twins with a kiss on the cheek each, then walks to a table up front that's ready to order dessert. Sharon stands, and the parting ritual of raising one's hand to facial level while keeping eye contact begins. Each person that is leaving does this to every person that stays. Those who stay have the option of mirroring the gesture or making a pleasant facial adjustment, usually accompanied by a nod. As the 4 leave, Light Hair watches them. "She is so damn good-looking," he says, ashing his parliament. "Which one?" Brown Hair asks, turning his head toward his brother. "Does it really matter?" Brown Hair turns his head toward Dark Hair. "The she's are out there and we're not. So I guess it really doesn't matter which one is good-looking," Light Hair adds. Brown Hair shakes his head and sighs as he lifts his black coffee to his lips. There's silence again. Actually, that's relative, because the TV is on and currently giving the NBA scores. The jukebox from the bar next door is playing a Phil Collins song, and the people that fill Andres that evening are talking with the usual bravado that is common for the times. They talk endlessly about the events and internal affairs of their society. Some find common points in culture. Others trade audio tapes of specific artists. Some discuss on the emotional level in a romantic situation, and some discuss the emotional reactions of others in a family situation. Some plan for the future. Others ponder the past. Still others seem to be plotting in the present. There are those who don't want to go home and those who want to stay. There are those who want to work and learn and those who want to play. There are those who think of life as long-term and those who live day by day. And there are those that you love, even while they're giving it away. Out of all these people, only those around this table are silent enough to hear the world around them. They even clear their minds. Except Michael. He wears an expression that clearly reveals the tempest of thought and emotion running through him. Noticing this, Felix shifts his eyes towards Mike. "What did you do over in Thailand?" Not much. I got kicked out of Wat Po, the biggest Buddhist temple, for leaning on a statue. Felix laughs a little. Really? Yeah, I was tired, so I leaned against the statue of the Buddha. My hand was on top of his head, and that's like the biggest offensive gesture toward the Buddha because the head is supposedly the holy part of the body, the accumulation of the total being. Placing my hands on it showed that I thought I was higher than the Buddha and didn't respect the Buddha's grace or divinity or something like that. Felix exhales the last puff and puts out the cigarette. Weird, he says, in a voice deep enough to be mistaken for James Earl Jones by a white ear attached to an ignorant mind. What else did you do? Brown Hair asks. Well, it's funny. That night I went out to dinner with my main technician, and someone yelled at me for pointing my foot in his direction while I had my legs crossed. The foot is supposedly the least desirable part of the body, and pointing it at someone is an insult. Mike drinks his soda as Dark Hair ashes his cigarette. So I pointed it at the waiter because he was being a dick. Then, on the way out, he deliberately spilt a drink on me, and the tech, Ed, punched him out with one right hand. He looks around the table. I hate violence. I just thought it was funny that in the same day I learn how the head is thought of in that culture, I also learn what the feet are regarded as. Mike's glances around the table stop as Light Hair raises his eyebrows to get his attention. I think he meant what else, like what you needed Ed for? Brown Hair nods towards Mike in agreement with Light Hair. Mike leans back in his chair. I went over with 4 techs and built that mainframe I told you about. They built the storage spaces and I constructed the codes while the office staff started scanning in all the data. Why do you have to have a head technician? Brown Hair asks. I had to leave a tech over there when I came back yesterday to run the first test from an office in the city. But when I went to start the test, Michael Cockland, Craig says as he walks from the doorway. You Irish lush! When did you get back into town? Last night, you Asian shirt presser. Mike stands and hugs Craig. Strange the way a greeting can be the stupidest thing one could say to another, as long as it's followed by a hug. Listen, I gotta get a pack of smokes. Take a walk with me around the corner? Mike picks up his Camel pack to see just one left. He looks up at Craig and smiles. You got me. He turns to the table. Tell Pierre I'll be right back. Anyone need anything from the store? Everyone shakes their heads. Mike and Craig turn and walk out. Outside in the night air, Craig walks fast. He and Michael have been friends for 8 years. They started a business then to help service computers for companies in the city. After 2 New York jobs, they were recommended to an organic produce company in San Francisco. From there, they produced a global network for a shipping company that Citibank used. Within 2 years, Citibank had commissioned the duo to create the worldwide ATM network currently in service. During that job, they managed to create a 30-second loop in the mainframe, during which they embezzled as much money as they could, exactly $2.2 million. They finished up the network and both walked away with about $1 million stored in Swiss bank accounts and $100,000 in separate chemical bank accounts. Although they had this crime in their shared past, they saw very little of each other afterwards. Michael went to Aruba and stayed at the hotel Joachim owned for his employee vacations. Joachim, being a shrewd and successful businessman, helped Mike with a few investments, and now Mike never has to work again if he doesn't feel like it, a privilege artists only dream about. As for Craig, he started his own advertising business and now is sitting pretty enough to have his smiles reflect his financial situation. "So what did the whiz kid have you do over in Thailand?" Craig asks. "Just a basic mainframe for storage and transfer, coded locks on the entry points." "I could have guessed that. I mean, what's he got cooking over there?" "It's really not my place to say. Come on, this is me. I know what's the score. I know what not to repeat." Craig slows down. They are walking side by side. "All I know is Biocen, the chief biological synthetics manufacturer on the world market, has begun purchasing huge inventory from the Jenna Corporation here in the States. Your friend is buying up steel in large quantities, as well as beginning contracts for the largest construction team in human history, and I want to know why." Here I thought the combination of the Thai government and Biocen security would keep things quiet. Michael laughs to himself. "Nothing that I want eludes me for very long." Mike looks at him. "I'm sorry. My curiosity got the better of me this time. It won't happen again." Mike nods. "If you tell me what he's piecing together." Michael laughs and gives in. "I can tell you, but it's in strict confidence. The strictest." "Like Citibank." "Like Citibank," Craig confirms. Mike sighs. "I only got a look at the blueprint for this thing, but it's a massive project. The plan is to use the steel as the foundation and girders for the Biocen Biodome, a 3-mile wide city in a casing of this breakthrough synthetic that's a cross between plexiglass and lucite. It's durable enough to withstand the pressure down near the mouth of the Atlantic Ridge." "Why?" "Because that's where he plans to build it." "What? What good is a city down there?" "He says it's something of an experiment in human social systems. He's been gathering information from the top scientists around the world for the last 30 years to figure out how to create and sustain a man-made ecosystem." "Everything you were putting on computer was information and research for the building of this underwater city. My man, you step in the nicest piles of shit one can step in." "How so?" "What, are you kidding me? You've had a hand in bringing rise to a technology so great we can only imagine the effect it will have on humanity. If this city can sustain itself, then humans no longer have to war over land. If people in this enclosed structure can be studied, imagine what we could learn about ourselves." They walk up to the window of the tobacco and newspaper shop. "Mr. Coughlin, I admire the life you are living and the opportunities that have come your way." He turns to the man behind the window. "Dunhill Blue, please." "There are downsides to it, you know. Like the effect on the environment would be devastating. He would need to attach a 25-foot air refurbisher to each wall. Do you know what the exhaust on those are going to do to aquatic life?" "Kill a few fishies? Aw, that's a small price to pay for a technological wonder." Craig takes his cigarettes after paying for them. I hope it collapses right on that fuck's head. Craig walked away. Michael turned to the shopkeeper. Camel filters, please. Craig takes the plastic off his pack and throws it in the nearest trash can. He opens the box and pulls one out as he walks back to Mike. Why is that? You got a light? Actually, I don't. I lost my Zippo in Thailand. That's all right. I once left a harp in San Fran's disco, but my Ronson is out of fluid, so get some matches. Mike pays for his cigarettes and gets 2 books of matches. If synchronized cigarette lighting was an Olympic event, these 2 would have won for the simultaneous striking of matches. Mike puffs his Camel to get it lit. Craig takes one long drag. So, who's that fuck? Craig asks as they start walking again. They walk slowly now as they consume the nicotine sticks. Jochum. Who else? Well, I never liked the guy much anyway. He's an opportunist. But so am I. I have nothing against that. It was something about his greed that struck me as not being standard. His goals seemed larger than any man could accomplish. They walked silently for a few steps. Besides, he became your best friend, and I just became your old partner in crime. Mike looks at Craig, startled by what he had heard. Craig looks slightly embarrassed. Not that there is anything wrong with that. They both laugh nervously. So what happened between you 2? Last night, when I got back into town, I went over to Jochum's new place in the city, Park Avenue. Nice place. He set up residence in New York to get away from the red tape in Thailand. The government over there is good about keeping the press away from businesses. But the price of the permits take their toll. So he left a man in charge of the office in Bangkok and hired me to create the mainframe so he can access it from here. Best of both worlds. Must be great, if you can afford it. Exactly my point. He can afford it. Mike takes a puff. Anyway, I get back here to run the initial test of the system. I check out the basic structure and it's fine. Then I started to access the separate levels and the screen went blank. I called the Bangkok office and my head tech gets on and says there was a power outage at the time of transfer, so all the information caught in the phone lines is lost. You made backups though, didn't you? Craig asks. Of course, on hard disks. Right next to me as I'm on the phone screaming at my tech to start the emergency generator. Jochum's assistant goes to start it up, and there's a knock at Jochum's door, and it's Farah. You're still hanging out with that sculptor girl. What's her name? DeLuca, Mike says. Farah DeLuca. You know, I finally saw one of her pieces in home decor when I was doing a job for them. Craig shakes his head and takes a puff. She is one mental chick, my man. How so? I must have studied that picture for an hour, and I couldn't decide if it was supposed to be a sperm whale caught in the cab of a truck or 2 fingers taped together on a cheese grater. I remember when she sold that piece. Yo, how much did that go for? 25 grand. For that thing? That chick is a space case, but she must be doing something right to make that kind of money. Craig ponders his last thought. I'm sorry, you were saying that she comes to the door? Yeah, so she comes inside and starts rambling on about this feeling she has that something terrible is going to happen. I try to calm her down, but she won't listen. She just keeps saying that we gotta go. We gotta get out of the apartment because something is coming. Well, I'm in the middle of a crisis already, so I'm telling her to calm down, 'cause she's starting to scare me. Joachim walks over and starts talking to her, and damn it if he doesn't calm her down. The phone rings, and it's Ed. He tells me that the generator is on, the system is up, but some bug is eliminating the data level by level. I tell him to let it go, and that I'll try to load it through the terminal I'm at. Suddenly, I feel a hard hit on the back of my head and I fall forward. The room gets dark, but I hold on to consciousness. Some guy steps over me and grabs the box with the discs inside. Joachim comes out of the back room and the guy shoots at him. Joachim dives back and tackles Farah to the floor. The guy tries to run out of the door and I grab his legs as he stumbles down. Joachim runs into the room as the guy is shaking me loose. The guy turns, shoots, and hits Joachim. He falls to the floor, and the guy points the gun at me, then looks up, turns, and runs away. I get up, and Farah is in the doorway behind me, just staring with a blank look on her face. I yell at her to call 911, and she doesn't move. I tell her again as I'm getting to my feet, and again while I get Joachim's gun from his bedroom. Finally, I shake her back to reality and she picks up the phone. So I go after the guy, taking the stairs with my head pounding. I get down to the garage and a van is speeding towards me. I jump out of the way and chase it as it enters the street. This is around 4:30 a.m., mind you, and the streets are empty. So I start firing at the van, and it explodes as it turned the corner. He puffs his Camel. I must have hit the fuel line or something. There was nothing left. So I ran back into the building before anyone could see. I got back up to Joachim's apartment and walked in the door to see Farah sitting on Joachim's lap, sucking face. I mean, the guy's got a bullet in him and they're making out. They walk in silence. This is the reason why you wish death on your friend? The mainframe is empty, the disks are gone, and the guy who did it died. There are no other possibilities. Mike sighs. She loves him, not me. So I have to just step away. There are always other possibilities. Did she tell you she loves him? She doesn't have to. I saw the way she comforted him. I saw what they looked like together. I just walked out of the apartment. Mike takes the last puff of his Camel and flicks it into the street. The ambulances arrived as I walked out of the building. I walked home, fell asleep, and came here when I woke up. They are standing in front of Andre's. You haven't looked at today's paper, have you? No. Why? Craig smiles. From one friend to another, read the paper. Craig shakes Mike's hand and turns to walk away. Wait, Mike stops him. That's it? No insight to the situation, no solution to the emotional crisis I'm going through? Craig smiles and shakes his head. Not from me, not this time. He walks away. Michael watches his friend walk down the block. He begins to wonder about the possibilities. Chance is the deciding factor in many people's lives. Before making a decision, humans are prone to analyze a situation to find as many possible outcomes they can find, in hopes of eliminating the less desirable ones in favor of the more desired or profitable ones. Humans try to mold a situation into what they want it to be, only to be undermined by the 6-letter force that defies predictions. Mike remembers days he had spent in Andre's rolling dice with his friends. The object was to have everyone roll 6s simultaneously. All it did was spark the debate about chance. Someone noticed early on that this game would be impossible to complete because of the odds stacked against all 6 members throwing the die for the 6 at once. They could roll from now until the end of time, if there is such a thing, and still not get the combination required. Others speculated that it was all in the way the die was cast that determined which number would be face up. This observation was correct, but who would spend the time to make all the precise calculations to ensure the desired outcome? Maybe with the help of a technologically enhanced limb, one could throw die for 6s continually. But then there came the idea that the human mind couldn't make the calculations required for the feat. No one agreed with that. The coffee house philosopher believes that in the human mind is the connection that gives meaning to life, that the brain has the ability to correctly calculate the angle and force of the throw to produce a 6 every time, and still knows that being capable of such action would lead to boredom quickly. The theory is that the mind has the extreme of logic locked inside itself, and that emotional reactions stand guard, so we don't have to feel the hopelessness of that extreme logic. Taken another step, there were those who believed that those emotions could be solidified into a spiritual force that could control the destiny of the die. Some thought that the spiritual force was what controlled the die. Michael thinks it funny that he remembers reading in Peanuts how dice were used in ancient times to decide the fate of civilizations and individuals. Using chance to decide fate. Michael finds that concept humorous and laughs aloud as he opens the door, holding it for 3 people exiting. The laughter is contagious, and Michael feels a form of contentment. Happy that he has spread some joy, he walks back into Andre's, smiling like a jolly general. He reaches the table to find Felix standing. "I've been here for 6 hours already. I'm going for a walk," Felix says. Everyone nods and understands as Felix moves along the counter to the door. Michael sits down to his BLT and starts eating immediately. Light brown and dark hair sit with their coffees. Michael looks up and swallows. "You said you saw Farah and Joachim in here a while ago," Mike says. They say nothing. Michael's conscious of this and continues. "Did anybody happen to catch the conversation?" Brown hair smiles wide. "I don't know what you see in that girl." Dark hair gets Mike's attention. "She walked in here late one afternoon and had a cup of coffee. I recognized her, and she even looked right at me, but she wouldn't talk. She seemed like a snob." He takes the last puff of his American spirit and puts it out. "So, we put on a little show for her." Mike puts his sandwich down. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we started discussing the contradiction of an artist selling his or her work when the art has the most meaning in the artist's life." "Trying to bait her into a conversation?" "Yeah, but she didn't take. She just looked out the window and drank her coffee, so I got frustrated and made a phone call. That's when we started in. light hair says to brown hair. We started arguing the pros and cons of an unartistic society's effect on the artists within that society. We argued it to the point of the infinite, and that's when the Joker came back from the phone. So I walk over to the table, and these two are arguing it up. And they ask me what I think, and I say, "What about?" They say, "Infinity." I say, "Scary, I mean funny concept." I look up, and she's looking at me smiling. Then she asks, "Which way to infinity?" I swing my hand up like this to point out the direction, and I accidentally smacked a tray of empty dishes out of Judy's hand. Mike starts laughing and almost chokes on his BLT. So the dishes break and Farah's laughing and I'm all embarrassed, so I sit back down. She has a way of causing things like that, Mike says, chewing. Were you here when Joachim showed up? They all nod. She must have hearing as good as mine, brown hair says, pulling out his pouch of tobacco. Because when he showed up, they talked for about an hour about all the conversations that were going on at the other tables. They talked about the overwhelming racial tensions that have been produced by stereotypes in America. Then she starts talking about the injustice of raising and killing an animal for fur. Brown hair speaks with sarcasm in his sneer and voice. He has a unique perspective. He believes that humans have the ability to commit such an atrocity, so it would be a crime against nature, human nature, to not use that ability. I was disgusted by such a justification for the sake of his conscience. She followed suit and argued, saying that we're the only animals that have the ability to kill for sport. He countered that wild dogs in Arizona have been known to kill for sport. She says we're the only creature that will ignore an ecosystem to build a structure. He says that beavers build dams that disrupt ecosystems. She says that's evolution. He says, exactly. Brown hair wraps it up. Your friend has a warped sense of morals. I think he confuses the progression of humanity with global evolution. Brown hair lights his cigarette. With that much power and that little understanding, I believe your friend could do some major damage to the world. Well, if he does, I assure you, it would be unintentional, Mike says, wiping his mouth with the napkin and pushing the empty plate to the side. Unintentional or not, Lighthair says, lighting a parliament, if he wrecks my planet, I'm gonna have to hurt him. Mike sips his coffee. They left after they ate, Darkhair says. I saw them a few hours later walking in the gardens, their arms wrapped around each other's waist. Michael puts his coffee down and lights a cigarette. Does that bother you? Lighthair asks. Michael ponders for a moment. Since I met her, I felt close to her. She matched my sick sense of humor and was wilder than even I could be at times. California girls usually are wild, Brownhair says. She's from Arizona, not California. Whatever. Brownhair leans back. Michael leans onto the table and smokes his Camel. How did you meet her? Darkhair asks, while rotating the sugar container around the ashtray. I was with Joachim at the Russian tea room one night when he came in from Paris. She was there meeting with her agent, who was visibly gay. I caught her looking at me a couple of times. I bought 3 bottles from the bar and walked back into the main dining room juggling them. This gets her attention, and she reaches into her purse and takes out 5 tiny balls and starts juggling them. By then, people were staring and gawking at us, so we started juggling to each other. Juggling can be a great icebreaker, Dark Hair says. And bottle breaker. I dropped the bottle of rye when she threw it to me. We still got applause, but the maitre d' was pissed. Puffs. Joachim and I joined them at their table, and we hit it off. I can understand why, Dark Hair says. Jugglers place a lot of trust in their partners. Juggling can be the greatest way to get to know someone. They all fell silent for a moment, looking at Dark Hair. Dark Hair sighs. No one gets my jokes. He grabs another American spirit. You still haven't told me why you're in turmoil over this girl, Light Hair says. She's everything I'm not. I look on the world and I see cold, hard facts that can be welded together to create something. She sees the world as clay that can be molded into any shape the mind desires. I'm focused on my goal at all times. She works sporadically on her projects. Where I see information, she sees instrumentation. Where I see knowledge, she sees art. He takes a puff and ashes. She has a love for life that exceeds why I can even conceive of life. She said to me once that it was my frankness that she enjoyed. I told her I hate art because I can't understand it always. She said that I could probably understand the art, just not the artist. She sounds like your other half, Brown Hair says. Mike is in a daze. Get this. She told me that the artist's creation reveals the perspective of the artist to the rest of the world in hopes of uniting people with a common vision. By doing so, an artist also makes it very easy for the parasites of the business world to take advantage. In this day and age, there are more people living off of an artist's creation than there are artists creating. So she makes you think. I make you think, and you are not in love with me, Dark Hair says, lighting his cigarette. This is true, but I also remember certain things about her that I don't remember about anyone else. What's her favorite color? Light Hair asks. Green. What's her birthday? Brown Hair asks, not missing a beat. Oh, that's easy to remember. Mike leans back. Her birthday's in September. Her birthstone is sapphire. Over in Thailand, I went down to the open market and found this beautiful sapphire necklace. I haggled with the guy and bought it for her. Mike looks in a daze again. I didn't give it to her, though. He sighs. September what? Dark Hair asks. Mike comes back to reality. September 24th. Ah, a Libra. She's supposed to be your perfect match, Dark Hair says. Really? It makes sense. You're a Gemini. That's 2 people. Mike starts tapping each of his fingers twice again. Libra is a scale with 2 plates. Will you stop? You know I have aversions to that number, Mike says, tapping the table. Light brown and dark hair laugh and puff and shake their heads. Felix walks back in the door with Icky behind him, still in his work clothes. Pierre also converges on the table to pick up the empty plate and drop off the cheesecake. Icky, what's happening? Just get out of work? Dark Hair asks. Yep. Icky lights up a Benson and Hedges. I just came from Beth Israel, where they got your friend. He taps Mike on the shoulder. Felix sits in his seat and lights are red. Yeah? Mike was portraying more interest than he wanted to. Yeah, he's been trying to call you for the last 12 hours. Icky takes a puff. He figured you'd be here. He knows me too well. Icky pulls up a chair and sits down. Man, I am stone tired. It was a madhouse down there, huh? Lighthair says. It was like a zoo there once the news got out, Icky replies. What news? Mike asked. Icky looks around the table. You mean he doesn't know? Everyone shakes their heads. What don't I know? Icky looks at Mike. Man, how can someone so close to the cutting edge be so uninformed? He reaches for his bag. Next, you're going to be telling me the moon is made of green cheese and shit. He pulls a late edition of the Daily News out of his bag and tosses it on the table in front of Michael. The camel falls out of his mouth as he reads it. Before it hit the floor, he was out the door. Felix eats the cheesecake. On the E train into the city, Michael reads that no body had been found in the van that exploded near his friend's Park Avenue apartment. His friend's face is on the front page right below the headline. Is this man 435 years old?